Hi, my name is Kirsten Forsch, and I'm going to do a brief presentation for you on my plan for the final research project and my proposal. The research question that I would like to explore is how can cooperators better evaluate member commitment through analyzing the members' voluntary and agreement incentive participation in three key categories. So I first want to look at economic participation, that being the business the member does with the co-op, and these being member organizations, governance participation, and that overall perspective that the member has of that relationship, all with the purpose of identifying additional risk factors within that relationship. This research will drive at measuring the voluntary commitment compared to agreement incented commitment. Primary data, I hope, will reveal some risk factors by looking at how much the business the member does with the cooperators compared to what they actually spend overall on insurance that potentially they could place with cooperators but may place elsewhere. As well as looking at insurance affordability stress, or even just renewal stress through premium increases year over year, profitability concerns, that sort of thing. My hypothesis is that the percent of member business they have with the cooperators and premium stress over time are higher indicators of that member commitment or threat to the member commitment than governance participation in the other survey responses suggest. The topic overview and significance. On that topic, I have identified three key things that are really drawing me to explore this question. So, from the research I've read so far, the member commitment surveys they tell a picture of the member's perception of the cooperative relationship. However, it feels incomplete. There's more to it than I think that survey can capture, especially the survey that Cooperators has administered for many years. At Cooperators, we actually incent members to participate via a member loyalty payment agreement. So I think the true risk in the relationship is harder to identify because they are incented to do business with us, to participate in governance. And even survey us because that's part of the agreement in order to receive their patronage. So while those incentives to participate are quite attractive, definitely a motivator, it makes finding other indicators of risk relationship a bit hard and necessary though to understand what's actually happening with the intent of implementing preventive measures for relationships that are actually truly strained that the current survey does not illuminate. I think ultimately that would prevent any risk of losing members, members leaving voluntarily because they've had enough of whatever the insurance challenge has been, and even the threat or potential threat of demutualization, which we don't really have a lens on right now. So analyzing the current survey data alongside other internal data markers that we don't look at today, and then comparing that against existing research could lead to increased awareness of membership risk. That's the hope. The literature review approach that I want to take is really to disseminate a bunch of literature starting with some what I'm calling foundational elements. There's a lot of great papers on trust, the psychology of participating in organizations, as well as member commitment. And that will build the core understanding of what is really being explored. And then I'm going to look at studies where there's been actually research done. I found many around consumer co-ops and agricultural co-ops, and I think by analyzing specific elements of their surveys that overlap with similar questions and approaches and themes within the Cooperators member survey, I'll be able to get a greater insight into what the Cooperators survey is telling us related to some of those core member commitment, trust, and psychology elements. Here's a picture of some of the literature I'm going to include in that. I'm not going to dive into each of those, but those have proven helpful so far, and I hope there's more out there. I'm going to continue to look. This is the evolution of my conceptual framework. So on the left side, starting with a synthesis and analysis of the cooperators data. So this is secondary data sources as well as some primary data sources that I want to introduce. And I've included in the box under that first little bubble all the different things I want to pull into that. Next to that, I guess concurrently, going to the internal cooperators data synthesis is a synthesis of data from existing journal articles and research on member commitment. And that aligned with, well, alongside the literature review. And I've highlighted in the box below what specifically I'm looking at in the literature review. All of those, by the squiggly lines, feeds into the analysis. And actually from that analysis, I've got another squiggly line going back and forth where based on that primary and secondary data analysis, I may uncover a need to actually go and do some additional data gathering through survey. So building some more primary data if there's some themes or clarity that needs to come following that initial analysis. All that to feed into discussion and conclusion for the project. So it has evolved a little bit from my initial very simplified conceptual framework. Research design and methodology. I've included some of that in the conceptual analysis, so this doesn't add a whole lot, but it shows a little bit more of the flow, gathering, analyzing, and comparing, doing a bit of synthesis, and from that, hopefully getting to understand a little bit more about the topic. My personal connection to this research. So I've got about I have 5 points here of what that connection is. My team administers the member engagement surveys biannually, and this has been a long-standing process. I think we've got surveys back to 2005. It's really expensive though, and these survey results, especially in recent history, are not providing meaningful information or key things that we can actually pull out and say, hey, we need to focus on this. This is a problem. This is something we need to do. Those consistently high scores that we've received of the overall member perspective have really cast some doubt on the validity of the responses. And the board has questioned this, management has questioned this, we've questioned this, and I think there's reason to question it. There's something more that is affecting the member relationship that we're just not able to get through what we're doing today. And despite an abundance of information via that survey, they're not long or not short, rather, they're quite long. I think there's other things that are putting the member relationship at risk. And my team actually deals with managing that risk. So it's all very connected to our day-to-day work. We work with a member. We often play a role of interceding when that business relationship is going sideways for whatever reason. So it'd be really helpful to connect all the dots to support the work that our team does and how that relates to the overall member relationship strength. I think there's some limitations. I'm kind of a wordy representation of what I think the limitations are. I'm thinking particularly of how to measure voluntary participation in governance. I'm using as a proxy for this the meeting minutes for motions. So what I'm thinking is that members, while they're incented to attend governance meetings, they can just sit there. We're voluntarily moving motions, something where we've actually captured in the minutes who moved the motion could be an indicator of their participation in a more meaningful way. There are other limitation I've uncovered is we do have members that participate a lot in discussion. However, we do not have their names noted traditionally in the minutes. They're referred to as delegates and not which delegate in particular. So it's a little bit hard to pull that out of there. Some of that in more recent times I could indicate just from my own participation in those meetings, but it's not something that's been measured or easily captured. Um, the second bit there is related to the two extra questions I really want to look at around that business relationship and a survey I'd like to send out to members around. Really just one question of what percentage of the overall insurance business that they do is with cooperators. So if they have spend, $1 million annually on premium, what percentage of that million is at cooperators? We can see what the member has with us, but we can't see the bigger picture. So I think that question would be really insightful. However, some of our members are really private about this sort of thing. So I'm going to have to be thoughtful about how I write a confidentiality clause related to that information and how I might protect that data for the purpose of the project. Although those internally might be very keen to know that information and specific to. So that needs to be considered before I were to put that out. And because we work so closely, I think that's part of the challenge. We'll be getting members to voluntarily share that information. I should add to that other method or other challenges with that could be just the timing, getting enough people's responses within the time of the project. So timeline, I think I've modeled this in a few different ways and already. However, I think phase one, there's a few phases that I would try to be fitting into the research, the final project timeline, but I'd love to get a start on phase one earlier. The more information I have on that, the better, so that there's lots of time for analysis. And I do need to leave time for that phase three if I need to go back out and do some select interviews, so that I've really budgeted so that that won't get pressured out of the whole project because I run out of time. And that concludes my presentation on my proposal for the final research project. I would love to get some feedback on what y'all think and if there's anything I should be considering or might be missing through all of this. It feels a little too simple, although that may not be the case when I actually get into it and I'm really diving into what the data is about. Another element I should probably mention is as I continue to look for what other research has been done on member commitment, it might really blow out that part of the project. I think it would be really helpful to have quite a few studies. Right now I've got, I think, 3 or 4. It would be great to have maybe double that just for the sake of having some meaningful data as I isolate particular survey themes from the cooperator survey and the research surveys, so that I've got a lot to compare it to, as well as a whole bunch of example of analysis, which will be, I think, quite interesting. Okay, that's it for me. Would love to hear some feedback. Thanks so much for listening. Bye.